So Apple has just unveiled and detailed iOS 27 a few weeks ago, while Google has dropped Android 17 in its stable incarnation, with more than a hint of Google now in Apple's next vision for mobile. Just how do these OSs stack up? Well, let's get into it in this video. If you love Android though, comparisons like this, maybe just entertaining things around the entire mobile industry, then do me a favour and hit subscribe, as I'd love to have you as part of the team. Cheers. So I want to get into the customization differences straight away, because I think this is probably one of the most pronounced areas we're seeing some changes this year for both mobile OSs. Sometimes we've noticed over the past couple of iterations how Apple has kind of leaned into giving iPhone owners options to at least add a base layer of customization. Liquid Glass last year, though, just completely wiped a lot of that good move and goodwill out of the window in favour of clear UI elements, which, as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of. Whether as a rebuttal to the complaints, Apple, though, has added a few options that in some ways make it obvious where the base Android 17 customization has sort of stalled over the past few years. For starters, iOS 27 has much better lock screen customization than Android 17, something you wouldn't have expected. There are options to minimize the clock entirely, which at least to me looks a lot like the at-a-glance widget for what it's worth. You can also change the colors of backgrounds on the fly, plus all of the extra widgets and clock tuning that were previous in previous versions. Widgets on the home screen are now fully resizable to take up a full page, something that might feel long overdue to iPhone. I think it kind of puts into perspective where we are with Pixel phones, which still has a limited or preset selection of clock styles for you to choose from, with some font adjustment options for a few of those, basically only one of them. Widgets are back though on the lock screen. Hub mode basically lets you add home screen widgets to a right swipe shelf, which might be useful for glanceable information. However, I've got to say, this isn't the same as the mini docked 1x1 or 2x1 tiles that iOS uses and works similarly to how a smartwatch does. I'd love to see Google add their own implementation of this, and we're seeing other OEMs like Samsung offer something similar, which I think is something that would be cool to see Google do with Pixel phones. But when you unlock your phone, there are some changes to iOS 27 and Android 17 that do help differentiate these a little bit more this time around. Granted, they're built upon last year's versions anyway, so there isn't a drastic amount of differences. Apple, though, is allowing people to finally adjust the liquid glass strength, and I really do applaud this decision. So if you choose to apply this theming to your icon set, there are options to adjust the intensity of the effect from fully clear to a more tinted or frosted appearance. Android 17 has introduced a few elements of Gaussian blur to a handful of certain UI sections, which I wonder is if it has been influenced by it. But when we look at liquid glass settings and they're adjusted to the maximum opacity level here in iOS 27, I have to say it looks eerily similar to the frosted Android 17 areas such as the widget panel, some volume sidebars, and more in the future QPR1 release. I will say though that the frosted UI isn't present everywhere on Pixel phones like it is on iPhones, and it's less aggressive in being applied to areas that would potentially reduce accessibility. Think the quick settings panel, certain sections, and of course on the lock screen with those all-important notifications. Although without getting too deep into the AI portion, at least at this stage of the video, Gemini Intelligence is coming later this year and will let you add some custom widgets or create custom widgets for customization to your home screen. Apple is sort of doing something similar with their own customization with a brand new shortcuts feature. This lets you craft a custom prompt for a task or something similar. They are task-based rather than reference options for your home screen, so it's a little bit more, I guess, closed off, but it does let you do things quickly. I would say I would love Google to just copy shortcuts wholesale. It's something I've been banging on about here on the channel for a long time. It's definitely one of the most powerful functions on iOS that we haven't really seen we haven't seen bridge the gap between iOS and Android, at least save some third-party apps like Tasker. The biggest tentpole change, though, in Android 17 is app bubbles in terms of usability this year. Of course, multitasking in iOS 27 simply does not work in the same way. There's no split screen option for phones. In fact, I will say multitasking barely works in the traditional sense. Bubbles, though, is a rebirth of chat heads, but repackaged here for 2026 and beyond. So if you want to be able to quickly jump back into a group chat, for instance, maybe get back in to see the status of an Uber ride while you're watching a video, it is a way to do that without using split screen, as of course some people don't like that option. Just dismiss the application and it lives in a floating bubble that you can stash for later, which might be useful for true multitasking on the go. For the most part though, when we look at usability, iOS 27 works just the same way as any iPhone operating system has worked for a really long time now. There are no major usability differences, save some applications which have a little bit more integration with Siri. Google has, though, done things to improve the accessibility and usability for multi-purpose or multi-device households. So they've found a way to make AirDrop work cross-platform. Although this isn't technically tied to Android 17, it will come to more devices with Android 17 updates. That isn't actually down to Apple either. So it should benefit iOS users regardless of what software version they're running on their phone. So yeah, not related or tied to Android 17 and iOS 27, but it's something to note just the same. So that's a few of the more standard sections out the way. Let's talk a little bit about AI and how this is truly differentiated here with iOS 27 and Android 17. So when we look at iOS 27, there is a big visual Siri overhaul and functionality difference. I will say the new update looks great. It's really improved drastically how it works. The two-step approach that relied heavily on ChatGPT is more or less gone here, which I think is really great to see. With the help of Gemini's underlying models, you can do so much more, and it's also a lot faster as well. That said, this is not Gemini running things behind the scenes. It's actually completely separate. Google's just helped work with Apple to improve their own Apple Intelligence models. I think doing things like being able to contextually search on iPhone feels better than it ever has before. You can ask for photos from a recent trip, or ask when you last texted or checked in with a friend via messages. I think these are useful reference abilities because you can do all of this from Spotlight Search or invoke the assistant, aka Siri, and ask for it to do it for you. It isn't anything that Gemini hasn't been able to do for a while already, but it is going to be a nice way for iOS 27 to at least catch or maybe hit some sort of base level of parity with Android 17 in the core AI-powered functionality that, yeah, we sort of expected with Apple Intelligence nearly 2 years ago at this point. What I will say is that certain agentic AI does work a little bit better than the sometimes sporadic Magic Q feature on Pixel phones. Magic Q, I will say, when it works, is fantastic. Like doing things like asking for a phone number via text or the date of an upcoming event. These will be shown to you after a brief little tiny pause. It'll give you the options pulled from your calendar, pulled from your contacts, and all those kind of things if you've linked them already. Siri is not as good at that kind of thing right now, but it should get contextual content suggestions later down the line as well. You can do things like add events to your calendar, sort of like how Google Messages has had for quick actions for a long time already and isn't necessarily bound by Gemini. I do think that Siri's implementation or Apple's implementation is a clean, concise version of it, but I won't say it's anything groundbreaking. It's just nice for iOS people to finally get something similar. Siri is finally allowing continued conversations as well, which works similarly to Gemini Live. I can't deny the ability to customize your voice to your own tailored expectations is something that I do think us Android fans will definitely be jealous of. I'm 100% jealous of it. On iOS 27, though, the experience when talking with Siri just feels a little bit stunted. It doesn't really feel like a flowing conversation like it does with Gemini and Android 17 and older devices. Definitely feels like a bit of a question and answer type experience, which Siri has done for a little while already. The visual search capabilities do rely on the camera application here, that it's not completely unlinked or untied from the experience of using it with a separate application. This doesn't feel quite as seamless, as I say, with Gemini Live Video or even Circle to Search, which is baked into the system itself. These don't require as many multiple steps. You can do things like get live video guidance with Gemini Live, which I think is much better for live troubleshooting. Siri can do certain things like this, but you have to take still images, static images, and then do question and answer, which, yeah, it can get you help, just not quite as real time as Gemini can be on an Android device. I will say there are good features with Siri, but they definitely feel par for the course now due to the rapid development of Gemini and AI features in general. In the time since Android Intelligence was first shown off and wowed a lot of people with, yeah, let's be honest, a little bit of vaporware. And considering Apple's stance on AI editing tools, I'm actually shocked at how good some of the AI functions here, like the AI reframe tool for adjusting the viewpoint of a photo while extended images and enhancing some images that you might not have perfectly captured when hitting that shutter button, works almost flawlessly as well. In some cases, it is actually better than Gemini or better than Gemini and Nano Banana combined. I do think these are genuinely useful tools in admittedly specific circumstances. Like I say, Gemini would rely on Nano Banana uploading to the cloud to do something similar. It seems that iOS 27 handles everything on device here, which again is another major bonus. I don't actually think that Google Photos editing tools are quite as good with things like image extension unless you're really, really specific about what you want. However, the Ask Photos function does give you effectively limitless options with image prompts for editing on the go. It's kind of a case of picky poison there which one you want, if you want unbridled options or something that's a little bit more fine-tuned and maybe a little bit better for the everyday scenario. I've kind of left out talking about Gemini Spark and truly deep diving into Gemini intelligence here, because while both of these promise more AI controls over Android phones, and Gemini Spark in particular gives you full control of lots of tasks on your phone when it does come to more regions and leaves preview in the coming months, I think it would be unfair to compare that to that, at least at this stage, as we aren't available, or I'm not able to test most of those here in the UK currently. But maybe we'll do that later down the line when it is available on more Pixel phones, hopefully in the coming months. So in essence, I have to say Android 17 and iOS 27 are, like any release that we've had over the past few years, quite a lot similar to their predecessors. We've had a bit of a reshake in the previous year, which means there's a bit more consolidation. As I say, it's more of the same with a few licks of paint added, not necessarily too many. AI is 100% the big ticket item, and that does feel like a bridge to some functionality gaps or lack of new functionality that we're starting to see. Definitely feels like updates and refreshes are a little bit slower than they used to be. I did worry last year that liquid glass would become a bigger component in Android as OEMs try and replicate it. It turns out that fear was completely justified. But this year, I think it's Apple's turn to try and replicate Google, but with Siri and Siri functionalities. If anything has screamed to me smartphone plateau over the past few years, it's these recent updates. Maybe AI does offer a way to differentiate these phones and operating systems, but so far, everyone seems to be doing the same things. It's image editing, writing emails, all that kind of thing, maybe controlling an application, which I'm not sure I would be willing to allow a piece of AI to do for me. I'm wondering as well, do buyers even care? Is it going to be something that makes you want to buy a phone because, yeah, it can call an Uber for you? Don't necessarily think it's a game-changing thing that certain companies seem to think it is. I think another thing that this poses is, if you want an AI-free phone experience without installing a custom ROM, which I do suggest some people do anyway, the options that you have basically gone entirely now that Apple is delving well into the AI side of things. And it does feel like that's the way it's going for everything across the board, smartphones, PCs, and everything else in between. I want to ask you, what do you think? Do you think iOS 27 is a good update? I mean, of course, we're an Android-focused channel, but we can give credit where it's due. And I do think certain aspects of iOS 27 and iOS in general are better than they work on Android. But of course, we are 100% an Android-focused channel after all. But let me know down what you think down in the comment sections below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this brief comparison of two operating systems that feel diametrically opposed at times. But thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you later.